Hey everybody, next step for your still life. You have your rough sketch that you did where you really learned how to see your objects, the forms that you're going to be drawing. For the next step, we're going to start working on composition, and what that means is how the objects are arranged on the page. And I know that when you set up your forms and photograph them, that you did try to compose them in an interesting way. However, we know from our first project that we worked on some tips on how to make a composition look more interesting. And one of those was to crop in on it so that some of the objects are going off the side of the paper. I'm using black paper strips to crop in on my sketch so I can see. This was the original photograph that I took, and I can really now understand the proportions of the width and the height of what my final drawing will look like. Now, if you don't have construction paper to make strips, you can actually get a newspaper and you can cut strips of paper that have like columns on it. If you have text on a page like this, you can use that as a line, and you can cut out strips and do the same thing with a newspaper. It's also good to have a ruler, and if you don't have a ruler, you can use just a regular piece of copy paper and fold it up 4 times to get a nice thick edge that you can use as a straight edge. I recommend doing that. And of course, your pencil and your sharpener. So I am going to start exploring different ways to crop in on this composition to see what I like. And the sphere is in the foreground. And you remember we talked about what that meant. It means that it looks as if it is closest to us. And sometimes it's nice to emphasize things that are closest to us. We also understand that the other things are further away because it's overlapping, and we discussed that when you arranged your forms. But what can we do before we even start drawing our final drawing is we can look at possibly cropping in closer and abstracting it, and to see if that looks interesting. So when I think about this sphere being the focal point, if I put that in the middle and it's just floating in space, that is not going to make for a good composition, right? It doesn't look like it's anchored anywhere. It's just floating in space. There's no balance. If it was perfectly symmetrical, meaning like a butterfly effect where everything was equal on each side, perhaps, but our eye does not find this to be pleasing. We often find that things in the corner and in like the bottom third of a composition looks more pleasing. So if I wanted to emphasize that sphere, I can put it in the bottom left corner here, and then open this up a little bit to see the top of this form there, and this would make for a nice composition. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to mark it with some corners just so I can see where that is. So that's one idea. That's one particular sketch I can do. And so I'm going to just very quickly bring that out. I suggest you do the same on yours if you want to use a different color pencil to make it easier to see. But this is going to be what I want to see in my composition. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing thumbnail sketches. So what's a thumbnail sketch? So the thumbnail sketch came from the idea of being, the size of your thumb. We're going to work larger than that. However, they're not big sketches, they're small sketches, and the purpose of doing small sketches is so you can work quickly and explore a lot of different ideas. So again, I'm looking at where that sphere is in relationship to the cropping I've created. Let me put this over my drawing so you can see it better in the camera. So that's left crop, and this over here. So this quick rough sketch that I did is not to size to the final drawing. The thumbnail sketch is like half the size of that. So again, I'm going to start with the sphere, and I'm just going to quickly lay in my shapes as it relates to this cropping. And now that I've really looked at these forms closely, it's going to be a lot easier for me to draw them because I'm starting to get to know where everything lines up. Okay, so there's my first thumbnail sketch. Quick, easy, I know where everything is, and I'm not erasing anything. I'm not really putting in my shadows. I'm just putting that there. So it's one idea. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to try another one. And I'm going to So there's a thumbnail sketch for the first one. Now I'm going to try another cropping on this and see what happens. Let's say that I want to do a square crop instead of rectangle, where all the sides are even. And I'm going to tape this together so we can move it around because I think that's going to make it easier. I know some of you use social media. Instagram typically reformats all your photos into squares, which sometimes is not the best, especially if you're taking a photograph that is a rectangle and you've thought about how it's laid out compositionally. Turn this over so the tape is not distracting. All right, so I have a square. I'm going to move it around and see what looks good. So, what if that circle is pushed, the sphere is pushed off, and it's more about the cone and the rectangle in the back of the square. Maybe that that sphere is kind of like a sun rising. So I'm going to go down now, and I'm going to make a square shape. And that means that these sides are equal. And I'm going to start again with the sphere in the foreground, and then I have that cube, and the rectangle goes all the way up to the top, and I do see some of the top of that form. This comes down. The cone is short of the rectangle, and there is the horizon line, top of the rectangle. So there's the square. That's the second thumbnail. So I'm going to look at both of them and see which one I like. This is definitely more dynamic to look at. So, what happens if we zoom in really close to it? It starts to become abstract, like we did with the tools that we worked on for our watercolor drawings. So I'm going to take my tape off here. So there's two thumbnail sketches, and I'm going to try a third. And just like the Instagram framing, which is square, there's also the shape of your phone, which is more of an elongated rectangle. And I liked how this zoomed in but I feel like I want to see more of that sphere, so when I do the value on it, it really starts to look like a form and not just a flat circle. So I want to see more of that. And I liked how I was zoomed in on that. I just need to see a little bit of that cube. And then I'm going to come down as tight as I can to the top of the rectangle. And I don't need to see the bottom of the sphere. I can cut off some of it. So let's look at them all together and see which one we like best. So the square one, I think, cuts too much off of that sphere. The original crop isn't bad. I could definitely stay with that, and then I would actually be able to see the bottom of that cast shadow. Let's take a look at the photograph. We don't want to cut off what tells us what it is. So this is definitely too short. If this was cut in the middle there, I'm losing how that shadow goes and wraps around the circle and tells us that it's a form. And then the same thing with this cube here. If I cut off too much of the side of that cube, I just have this white rectangle going back into space, and I don't have the reference of the shading on next to it. So I don't want to take that out. And I definitely don't want to take off the top of this. So I think that either the original first one that I did or this third one. And so I think I'm going to stick with the first one because I really like to see where that shadow is off the sphere. So finish your thumbnail sketches, just pick one. And then the next video, I will show you how to scale that up to the actual size you're going to work. And for that, you should be working on, still in your sketchbook, totally fine. And if you do not have your sketchbook at home, just a regular piece of copy paper. And I'll see you back here for the next steps.